Good job. All right, we're going to throw a little levity into this. Well, kind of. That means funny, not size-wise. For 40 years, Brian's had a colleague, Ken Neal, who's worked with him and knows all the secrets. So we asked Ken to come up here and talk a little bit about his experiences working alongside Brian for the last 40 years. Ken?
He is just strutting up here. I think this is a pretty confident guy here. You need a beer?
Yeah.
Brian, you want a beer? You want a beer? You want water? Water. Oh, yeah.
I gotta have to talk. All right, Brian. If you were expecting any hugs from me, forget it. And I want to thank you for leaving me with your 3 angels. All I can say is thank God I have my work wife, Antonio, to help me out. All right, it's an honor for me to be up here to speak about our dear friend Brian. I've had the privilege of working for him for almost 40 of his 42 years. Brian is the most sincere man I've ever known. He was successful early in his career with kids as athletic director and later as program director because of his sincerity and genuine caring for kids. Later, he transitioned to his role as development director without a lick of experience, and for a while he had no clue what he was doing. But because he was sincere and he truly believed in the product that he was selling, the Boys and Girls Club, he's flourished in his career, bringing more friends to the club than we'll ever know. We'll miss him dearly. But enough of this love fest. Like any event, this all started with a committee. At the first meeting, it was suggested that we really should have someone do some sort of roast of Brian to balance the program. And everyone looked at me. And I believe it was Steve that said, Ken would be perfect. He never has anything nice to say about anyone. So here I am, Brian. You know, I usually don't have any problem poking fun at anyone. But I have to say this makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Citizen of the Year, loved by everyone. I feel like I'm about to make fun of Mother Teresa. Fortunately, I can do that. You know, this time of year, one of my wife and I's tradition is to watch the holiday movie classic, It's a Wonderful Life, which we did just this past weekend. As I was watching the movie, which I'm sure most of you all have seen, all I could think of was that Brian Tremblay is George Bailey. The parallels between Brian and George Bailey are just mind-blowing. Like George Bailey, who devoted his life to the Bedford Falls Building and Loan, Brian, who could have done anything with his life, chose to devote his life to the Boys and Girls Club of Manchester. Like George Bailey, Brian is loved by all, and he would be willing to jump into a freezing river to save a stranger's life. You want some other similarities to George Bailey? Well, here's Brian praying for a grant from the Charitable Foundation to be approved. Here's Brian pleading with one of our donors. And Mr. Potter was a tough sell. And here's Brian at our very first Foundation of Friends breakfast. Here's Brian spending the money we raised. Yes, Brian, it's truly been a wonderful life. I think Brian just got his wings. Anyone who really knows Brian knows that he has always struggled with time management. Over the years, I've come to realize that it's because he has the attention span of a 2-year-old. Brian reminds me of those movies in The Dog Up. You know, the ones that would be walking along somewhere, and all of a sudden they would see a squirrel and it was all over. You know that's Brian. The guy can't focus on anything. One minute you're talking to him about something, and the next minute, Brian's off going, squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. At the club, we never know where he is, and he's never where he's supposed to be. In fact, I think that half the time, Brian doesn't even know where he is. And I'm sure that most times when he finally gets somewhere, he's forgotten why he's there. We refer to this character trait as "Where's Brian?" You never know where Brian's gonna turn up. Where's Brian? He's not in his office. Where's Brian? He's late for a meeting. Where's Brian? Steve's looking for him. Where's Brian? He was supposed to be here at 10 o'clock. Where's Brian? He was supposed to be on the 18th hole. Where's Brian? He was supposed to meet with a donor. Where's Brian? I can't find him anywhere. You know, early on, working with Brian, I found out that his dad, Arthur Tremblay, was an accomplished artist. Brian always wanted to paint like his dad, and one day he came to me with one of his drawings. Not wanting to really discourage him, I told him to keep working at it. And he did. He kept working on his drawing skills. And 2 years later, he came up to me with his next piece of art and said to me, "Look, Ken, I'm twice as good." Good news is he's going to have plenty of time to practice now. You know, I'd like to stand up here and tell you that Brian's wife, Judy, is his greatest love. But Brian has always had 2 greater loves in his life. His first love, he met in the woods one day. She was wearing an orange bikini, and she was a real beauty, but she had a hell of an overbite. It was love at first sight. I've never seen a man to be so excited about his chainsaw. Not only is he a weekend warrior, but a weeknight, workday, anytime warrior. I'll never forget the first time Brian came to my house to take down one of my trees. Feverishly, he worked at the tree, finally toppling it with his saw and cutting it up. Afterwards, all sweaty, he sat down, he lit up a cigar, and with a contented look, he said to me, "Better than sex, Ken, better than sex." Brian is proof of the age-old philosophical question, if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? I know it does, because I've been talking with Brian, and all of a sudden he turns, runs in circles, going, "Tree, tree, tree," and then we don't see him for 3 days. I'm not exactly sure where and when Brian met his second greatest love, but I suspect it was very early in his life. Her name is Homebrew, and they're inseparable. On a boat, in a bar, at a formal ball, on a camping trip, with friends. We tried to figure out just how many times Brian has been with his second love, but we couldn't count that high. Many people think that being named Citizen of the Year for Manchester was Brian's greatest accomplishment and gift to the citizens of Manchester. But I'm up here to tell you that it wasn't. Brian's greatest gift to Manchester was when he went from this to this. We are all so grateful when he ditched his Tom Selleck porn star mustache. I mean, look at this thing. Thanks, Brian. You know, there's so much more and so many stories I could share with all of you about Brian, but I'm sure that we will all be swapping Brian stories throughout the rest of the night. I do, however, want to leave you all with the many faces of Brian Tremblay. Bob the Builder Brian. Citizen of the Year Brian. Rip Van Winkle Brian. The Hunchback Brian. The Karate Kid Brian. Dolly Parton Brian. One of my favorites. The Lieutenant Governor Brian. Tweedledum Brian. Rudolph the Reindeer Brian. Brother Brian. Family Man Brian. Miami Vice Brian. Athletic Director Brian. Rockstar Brian. Referee Brian. Dollface Brian. And lastly, I want to leave you with one more image of Brian that I have to warn you may cause you to lose sleep tonight and maybe for many nights. Friends of Brian, let me present to you Canadian Pointer Brian.
Sit down. We're not done.
We just lost a lot of donors.
Oh, no. Was I right about Ken being the only guy that should do that? Ken referred to a very interesting point, and he referred to Brian's father as an artist. And one of the coolest things is the label you see on this can, or that label you see up there, was designed by Brian's father.